Well, I'm sure you heard all the hullabaloo around the budget. There were all sorts of different write-ups, different people giving their hot takes. As opposed to a hot take, I like my takes nice and cold. I like to take a bit of time, digest what I've seen, and talk to some people that really know what they're talking about. That's exactly what we're going to do with my next guest, Dr John Humphreys, the Chief Economist for the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. Thank you very much for, once again, for the Aussie Wire, taking a moment out of your very busy schedule to talk to us.
G'day, Topher.
Now, we've seen the budget come out. We've seen, obviously, Jim Chalmers was as happy as a pig in mud. I've got some footage of him here. He was so incredibly thrilled with himself to finally be standing up there in Parliament House, delivering on a budget and starting off with all of the usual platitudes and all of that. What would you say are the key takeaways of this budget? We've seen debt being racked up at 1 million miles an hour for decades now, ever since 2008. Oh, not decades, excuse me, nearly 2 decades, ever since 2008 at a federal level. We've seen spending get completely out of control in just the last few years with COVID and all the rest of it. What's your takeaway from this budget?
This budget reminds me a lot of recent years, actually, which is that they gets 1 star for not being as bad as Whitlam or Rudd, but otherwise it is a lost opportunity on a number of fronts. So the first thing I'll note, I'm not sure if this has been widely understood yet, the surplus for the year 22-23, that's not actually the budget year, by the way. The budget year is 23-24, so they're talking about last year. But the surplus is actually in deficit in fiscal terms. So the fiscal budget was a slight deficit. Now and realistically, the cash surplus is a little bit built on smoke and mirrors. They've shuffled spending between years to make it a surplus. Having said that, it is undeniable that the 22-23 year, the budget position improved significantly. And that is a good thing, right? I mean, it could be worse if it was Whitlam or Rudd. As the revenue came in, they could have wasted it all. So I will give them 1 star for as the revenue came in, which they didn't do anything to achieve, but as it came in, they didn't waste it all. So that's the 1 star for the government. It's nice to see that surplus, even if it is partly smoke and mirrors. It is very disappointing to see that the surplus disappears almost immediately into the budget year, 23-24 and beyond. And more than that, and this has been true for most of the last 2 decades, once again, it is a missed opportunity of no microeconomic reform. And as we've discussed previously, nearly every time we talk, you need that microeconomic reform to drive productivity, to drive higher wages. We've had a stagnant economy for a while. We've had stagnant wages for a while. If people ever want to fix that, we have to get serious about microeconomic reform, and that is entirely missing in this budget yet again.
Look, microeconomic reform, I think, is going to have to be a topic for you and I to do a deep dive on to send out to our insiders or something like that. It's not really something we can go too deep into in a 5-7 minute interview. One of the things I do want to note, though, is you've been talking about this for years. I've learned tremendously from you over the years. The importance of balancing a budget and not just running up a credit card until eventually you end up paying for it, either in inflation or taxes or in some way, shape or form. You end up paying that money back, and it can get a lot worse than just having to pay it back. You can end up in all sorts of strife. But it seems to me that the general public have no concept of the problem that can come if a government racks up too much debt. I see the public responding to this budget and celebrating, oh, they're spending money on this and they're spending money on that. I see all of the major political parties, with the Liberal Democratic Party being one of the few exceptions, promising more money. We'll give more money to this, more money to that, more money to that, as though we've got this bottomless pit of the stuff. In that context, given that we're a democracy and people vote for their government, how do we bring a budget back under control if people are just going to vote for more money?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and it's something of a political point. It used to be for decades that whichever political party could promise a surplus used to get a payoff. They used to get a political benefit from being able to promise or claim to be the responsible party. And so there used to be an incentive to try and bring in a surplus. If people won't reward good fiscal management, there's very little incentive. I mean, if the voters don't reward good fiscal management, there's very little incentive for a politician to do it, because the other option is that they can just sprinkle the money around. Everyone gets a trinket. And of course, that's people like getting trinkets. That's going to buy them more votes. So it's a very good point. I'm not sure how to fix that at a political level, other than reminding everybody that if we continue sleepwalking towards ever higher debt, that is going to end up being a very dangerous thing. I think, if I may say one more thing on this, the problem with that is, of course, a debt crisis, you get there very slowly. You sneak up on it. I've likened it to, it's like you're walking up to the end of a cliff. You do not want to fall off the edge of the cliff, But every step you take before you fall off the edge of the cliff feels totally safe, right? Every step feels totally safe. So you keep going. The problem we have with the debt cliff is you're walking towards the end of the cliff in the dark. You don't know when the last step is. So it would be very prudent for us to stop walking that way. The truth is, we're probably not at the edge of that debt cliff now. Debt could go higher and it wouldn't ruin this country.
Yeah.
But the problem is not the level of debt we're at now, it's the trajectory we're on. We keep building it up, and we've got some spending pressures built into the budget. The rate of growth of government's health spending, aged spending, and the NDIS spending is unsustainable. It's out of control. It's going up far too high. And that's one of the reasons why you need microeconomic reform to get them under control. But as we mentioned before, both sides of politics have been missing in action to get that under control. So we are just sleepwalking towards a very undesirable location.
Well, that's a wonderfully optimistic outlook you've painted there for us, Dr. Humphreys. I do want to touch on one more thing. We've got very little time left. I want to touch on one more thing, and that is the relationship between inflation and the amount of revenue that the government makes thanks to things like bracket creep. This is something that, again, I did not understand. I learnt this from you. Can you just give us a very quick layman's overview of why inflation and therefore bracket creep can actually help a budget bottom line to appear better and can raise taxes in a very sort of stealthy, unseen kind of way?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. One of the main reasons the government's been able to declare they have a surplus in 22-23 and improve the budget in the out years is bracket creep. Bracket creep is basically a stealth hidden tax increase that we get every year, worth up approximately $10 billion a year of tax increase, which is an insanely high number. And they get away with it because they don't announce it. It happens implicitly. It's built into the system. As wages go up, people get into higher tax brackets. As you get into higher tax brackets, you pay a higher and higher percentage of your income through to the government. And they don't have to pass a new law to do that. It happens automatically. And this is particularly galling when the wage increase is being caused by inflation. So your wages aren't even going up in real terms. You can't buy more things. You're not better off. Your wage goes up with inflation, you're no better off, but you're in a higher tax bracket. And this is bringing in windfall gains to the government. Again, I've got to be fair, this is both sides of government are very aware of this. They gleefully take the windfall, they pocket that $10 billion a year, and occasionally they sprinkle it back to people with new trinkets and expect to be thanked, which is understandable politically. But the honest way to go about it would be to index those tax brackets so that we don't have that bracket creep happening every year. Now, I know you have to go quickly. I wanted to mention one other thing, if I could, and that is we talked about the 22-23 year being in surplus, kind of surplus, pseudo fake surplus, but good enough. The 23-24 year, it really should have been in surplus. And here's the kicker. It could have been. The 23-24 year was about a $14 billion of deficit. How much new spending do you think they announced in that year?
Off the top of my head, yeah.
So if they had simply sat on their hands, I'm not talking about making any cuts here. They could keep all of the old spending rolling forward, not one cut. If they just sat on their hands and spent only 1 year being responsible, 1 year of not putting out new spending, they could have reported an actual, not a fake surplus, an actual surplus in this budget as it should have been and as it could have been. But they couldn't withstand the temptation to sprinkle more and more taxpayers' money around.
Well, you've used the magic word there that answers your own question, the word responsible. That's why they weren't able to do it. Unfortunately, you're quite right. This is a bipartisan problem and something that we're going to have to keep talking about because it's not a problem that's going to go away anytime soon, but that's going to have to do for today. Dr. John Humphreys, Chief Economist for the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, thank you so much for your time today.